So again, it's an easy issue. It's a point of logic. It's not political. Okay. And there's no economist who would disagree with you. Once they heard the argument, they go, yes, of course. They would agree the public sector, as a point of logic, should hire everybody. Point of economic logic, financial logic, everything. It's just a win-win-win for the whole country if if all the disabled were in public service rather than private sector. Now, that doesn't mean you don't want some in the private sector, but that would be like a special case if you just want to look at the hard numbers. Okay, the hard numbers say, look, let's get all these people, good paying jobs in the public sector, like right now, to improve. What's that?
Just better.
To improve the total performance of the economy. Okay, it's just a major benefit for the standard of living.
So Denise and Nati, are we good on Facebook? Are we ready to go?
One second, let me check on that.
Yes, because I think we're just about to get started.
Before it.
So there's been like outages today around the southeast of the U.S., south and southeast of the U.S. I know Texas had a really bad outage last night. So I hope that doesn't affect our meeting today. But just want to give everyone a heads up in case there's any issues with that. Can you all hear me okay? Is audio's fine? Okay, good. All right, Denise, you let me know once we're good on Facebook.
So our looks like he's back.
Okay, yeah, so I keep having some technical issues, and I think that's because I keep trying to put it live on my end on Facebook. Denise, do you have it available on your end to go live on Facebook or no? You're muted.
Myself?
I'm testing it out. I'm testing it out as well.
Okay, it's not a big deal because we're gonna record this and upload it on our YouTube anyways. So even if we don't get a live stream, it'll be fine. So just to make sure we have enough time to do everything, I think we should just go ahead and get started. So as most people should know by now, we have Mr. Warren Mosler on. Otherwise known as the godfather of MMT, as his term has been coined. He's been a progressive public policy advocate for the last 3 decades. And before that, he was a successful investor and a banker. So he has the insider knowledge that very few economists have in terms of how our monetary and fiscal operations work. So everyone could give so MMT stands for Modern Monetary Theory. Thank you. So Modern Monetary Theory is a school of thought within economics. I mean, I'm sure Warren can go into this a little bit more, but the long story short is that it has revolutionized the way that we think about fiscal and monetary policy today. So if everyone could give Warren a little digital round of applause for showing up, being very generous with his time. I'd like to open it up first, Warren, by having you give us a little bit of your own background and, more or less how your ideas, what is MMT? Where did MMT come from? The floor is yours.
Okay, so the important thing to know about MMT is sequence. What comes first? And up until MMT, maybe even now, every congressman knows that he has to get money, he has to get dollars to be able to spend. So he has to tax to get dollars to spend. And what he doesn't get in taxes, if he wants to spend more than that, he's got to go out and borrow the money. So he's got to either tax or borrow. To be able to that everybody in the Federal Reserve and every central bank always know. I worked in banking. I've been in capital markets for 50 years. They all know that the dollars to pay taxes and the dollars to buy bonds come from the government or its agents. The commercial banks are agents of the government under the Federal Reserve Act. That's the whole, independence is nonsense. But they're federal. They're agents of the federal government. So the dollars to pay taxes, the dollars to buy bonds. Okay, connectivity issue. Am I okay?
Yeah, you're okay right now. We can hear you okay, but your video is freezing a little bit, but you're okay right now.
Okay. So all the dollars to pay taxes come from the government. That means it's not that the government needs our dollars to be able to spend. It's that we need the government's dollars so we can't pay our taxes because that's. And so if you closely at the accounts of the Federal Reserve, which adds those dollars to the economy, and only then can taxes be paid or bonds purchased. So that's what I mean by sequence. All right. And the idea that everyone's had it backwards is what's so revolutionary. Because once you realize the government spends first, and then taxes get paid, and then government bonds get bought, then you realize there's no such thing. The question of how are you going to pay for it? It's just not applicable to a government that spends first, or your borrowing is crowding out private sector borrowing. Well, it's not applicable. You're spending first and just borrowing back your own money. All right. And so let me just start with that. And do you want to open it up to see if there are any questions?
Yeah. So
but I want to have sequence as the major contribution. That it's all people actually need to understand to be way ahead of what's going on, in mainstream economics.
So maybe we could give kind of a concrete example here, because many times when progressives or the Democrats try to offer up a public policy, let's say we want to support infrastructure spending, right? And we want to build we want to expand renewable energy infrastructure. The first question that always comes to people's minds, voters' minds, is, well, how are you going to pay for that?
That's right. So we've turned that around. That's not an applicable question. The government pays for everything just by crediting an account. In other words, if you have a bank account and you're getting paid by the government, and you had $1,000, and they pay you $5,000, now you have $6,000. Well, what actually happened? So the number in your bank account was 1000, and then they changed the 1 into a 6, so now it's 6000. They just changed the number in the bank account. They didn't get a gold coin and hammer it into a computer or get dollars from a taxpayer and give it to you. There is no such thing. It's just changing numbers up. That's how they spend. But the important question, once you know the sequence, is, are those things that the government wants to buy, are they offered for sale? And do the sellers want to get paid in dollars? Anything offered for sale where the seller wants to get paid in dollars, no problem. The government can pay those dollars. Right? So the questions are these things available? Are they for sale? Not, is the government going to get the money to buy them? And a lot of times the answer is no, they're not available. They're not for sale. Maybe the government wants to hire people to build something or to be contracted to do a large project, and everybody already has a job. Well, they're not available. Sorry. To get them to do what you wanted. And so again, it's about sequence. It's about understanding that sequence. It changes the questions that are asked of government. The government has to ask before it does it. Now, let me complete the sequence for you, if I may. So you have a government, as you said, wants to buy things. They want to have Medicare for all. They want to have military. They want to have public health. So how do they do that? How do they get things to be for sale so that they can buy them with their dollars? So they do that by imposing tax liabilities. They put a tax, I'll just use a simple tax for this show, for example, on everybody's house for $10,000 a year, just for example. Okay, they didn't collect $10,000, but a tax liability means you now owe the government $10,000 if you have a house. Now they've created an economy where people are trying to sell things to get the dollars that are needed by the economy to pay the tax to the government. So the first thing they do is create tax liabilities in order to create sellers of goods and services so that the government can then buy them. So number one in the fiscal process is the tax liability. So taxes are important, not collecting the tax, but the tax liability is the important thing that has to come first. All right, so first there's tax liabilities, and that creates people looking for paid work who want dollars. What do we call those people? We call them unemployed. People looking for paid work who can't find it or unemployed. So the tax liabilities create this army of people looking for jobs that pay dollars. And so it creates unemployment. So the purpose of tax liabilities, of taxation, is to create unemployment. Why? So now the government can hire all these people who desperately need its dollars to pay the tax so they don't lose their house. All right, so number one, tax liabilities. Number two, we have unemployment. Number three, the government hires the people that the unemployed that it created to do the work that it wants done, which was the point of the whole exercise. Okay, then it pays the people, and then they pay their taxes. And that's the end of the chain. All right, and how do you know it's the end of the chain? Well, if you were to pay your taxes with actual $20 bills, let's say you were a waiter and you had a lot of old $20 bills, went into the IRS office and used it to pay your taxes, they would say, thank you very much for helping to pay for Afghanistan or whatever we're doing right now, and the COVID vaccine. And they give you a receipt. And then as soon as you're gone, they ship those dollars out and they get shredded. And you can buy shredded money in Washington. Okay, now who else would take your dollars and shred them? No, nobody. But if you think about it, it happens all the time. Think of the movie theater. They are the Super Bowl. They sell you a ticket, you go to the game, they take that $1,000 ticket, they tear it up and throw it away because it's the end of the chain. Okay, so we all see how that works. Notice also that the movie theater or the football stadium, they don't collect the ticket first and then sell it. We all know they have to sell the ticket first, get it out there, and then they collect the tickets. It's the same thing with the US government. They don't collect the dollars first and then spend them. They come from the government. They have to spend them first, okay, and then they can collect them and throw them away if it's old cash that they don't want. All right. So again, I come back to the word sequence. If you understand the sequence, then you understand modern monetary theory, and you understand what's wrong with the debate up until modern monetary theory.
So why? So this is something that I personally think it's extremely important that anyone involved in politics should understand.
Yeah.
But those who are a little bit more left of center have historically, I feel, ignored the more minutia of these things, how they work. They focus a lot on the theory aspect. So I wanted to ask you, why do you think it's important for you have a lot of young Democrats here. Why do you think it's important that young Democrats or young progressives understand this?
Right. So they need to understand what fiscal responsibility is. The government that creates unemployment with its taxes, its tax liabilities, its taxation policy, right? In order to hire those people, right, has a responsibility of not creating more unemployed than it wants to hire. If the government's hired everybody it wants and there are still unemployed people out there, it means that the taxation created more unemployed people than the government wanted to hire, and that's irresponsible. Why would anybody do that? Why would you tax everybody to get them to need your money and then not give them a way to earn it? What's the point? You just want to go burn their house down for down payment, just out of spite or something like that? Okay, that doesn't make any sense. You do it, you have to recognize that unemployment represents fiscal irresponsibility. It represents a mistake, a miscalculation on the part of the US government. They have overtaxed us for the size government that they've established. They haven't spent enough to give us the funds we need to pay the tax and to net save. Because if there's going to be any net savings of dollars, those dollars have to come from the government. They can't come from anywhere else, or else they're counterfeit. Okay, and so so tax liabilities create a need for dollars to pay taxes, and they create a need for savings of dollars. And if unemployment is the evidence that the government hasn't spent enough, provided enough dollars to cover the need that it created, you have to understand that responsibility of the government before, if you want to win the arguments for the proposals that you're making. Okay, it's just absolutely a prerequisite for winning the arguments. And that's why the progressives, I believe, haven't won very few of their arguments over the years. And if they have won, they've won oftentimes for the wrong reason and then lost them subsequently. Okay, but once you've got an understanding and you're making the correct argument, nobody ever goes back.
So you're telling us that unemployment is not something that happens in nature. And it's not just a naturally occurring phenomenon?
Correct. It's a monetary phenomenon. Unemployment's about people looking for paid work and dollars. They need dollars. It's not about people who can't find a job volunteering for the American Cancer Society, right? This is about starvation, a money famine created by tax liabilities that gets filled by government spending. And the evidence that it's not filled is a residual unemployment. It can't come from anywhere else. You can't have people looking for jobs that pay money if there's no such thing as money.
So basically, unemployment is a political choice.
Yeah, yes, it's a proactive political activity, process that's been done. The dollars are the tax credits needed to pay the government's taxes. The government says you need US dollars to pay our taxes. And unemployment is people looking for those US dollars. Now, when the government spends a dollar, only one or two things can happen to it. It's either going to be used to pay taxes that day, or it's not going to be used to pay taxes, in which case it's saved. So if people go out and work for dollars, either they need them to pay taxes or to save. And if they use it to buy something from somebody else before the day's up, that person either uses them to pay taxes or saves them. And if he spends them, that person does. So when the bell rings at 3 o'clock and the bank's closed, whoever's left holding the dollars is either use them to pay taxes or to not pay taxes, in which case they've saved them. So those are the only two things that can happen. Either get used to pay taxes or they're saved. Now, the government spends more than it taxes, and that supplies the savings. The public debt is nothing more than the dollars the government has spent that haven't yet been used to pay taxes. And they sit there as savings in bank accounts. The bank accounts are called US Treasury securities. Those are just savings accounts at the Federal Reserve Bank. They give them a fancy name and call them US Treasury securities. But if you think about it, it's a bank. If you buy a Treasury security, you give them money. Later, you get it back with interest. That's the same as a CD, a certificate of deposit, or a savings account in any other bank. There's no difference. It just has a different name on it. So nobody's thought about it that way until we've been promoting the understanding of what it is. Okay, so all this public debt, how did it get there? This year, the government spent $6 trillion or $7 trillion, and $4 trillion was paid in taxes. The other $3 trillion is still sitting there in bank accounts, somebody's bank account. Okay, it already is the money. A Treasury security is the money. It's dollars in a bank account. How do you pay it back? How does the bank pay back the money you have in checking or savings? It just shifts them to another account for you, or gives you pieces of paper, green pieces of paper. It's already the money. There's nothing, paying it back is not an applicable question. When Treasury securities mature, what happens is the central bank shifts those dollars from your savings account, the Treasury security, to your checking account. They call that a reserve account because it's the Federal Reserve Bank. Again, a fancy name for checking account. There are no taxpayers and no grandchildren in the room. They do it for 50 or 75 billion every month, where they just subtract the money from the securities account, from the savings account, and they add it to the checking account. The debt, that part of the debt is paid. It's like, it's all it is. It's already the money.
So just to make sure it's clear to everyone what you're saying, the fact that the federal government has a fiscal deficit, and that fiscal deficit gets accumulated in what is colloquially called the national debt or the public debt.
Yes.
That is not really a debt the way like a credit card debt is to an individual.
Right. So for the government, what they owe you, the money is a debt because they owe you the right to use it to pay a tax. And so the accountants call it a liability, which they classify as a debt. So it's like if, I don't even need to give you an analogy. It's just a tax credit. If you are in tax credits for putting in solar, okay, in the government, and you have the right to pay taxes to either your state or to the federal government, with those tax credits can be used to pay taxes, that's considered a government debt because they've given you the right to satisfy your tax liability. So for accounting purposes, they call that a debt. All right. So it's not wrong to call it the public debt, but it's a little misleading because it's not about owing something they don't have or can't get. It's about accepting what they've given you back in return. Notice when you pay your taxes, it's called a tax return. You're returning those dollars back to the government. The word revenue comes from a French word that means to return. Back in the Bible, it says, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. Pay your taxes, give Caesar his coins back. They came from him to begin with. Romans had the same. Everybody in history has always had this exact same system. The knowledge was only lost a couple of hundred years ago. Before that, everybody knew exactly what I was saying. Nobody, take 2 seconds to stop and listen to it again. It's just too easy. All right, but unfortunately, we've lost our way, and it's disastrous.
It is disastrous. I believe we have Alex and or Stephanie. You guys want to ask your question? Okay, so they're driving right now. So they are asking about, for example, Elizabeth Warren's proposal to do it was the 2-cent plan. I believe that was the wealth tax.
Yes.
Do you think it hurts progressives long term to propose that kind of a policy connection between taxing wealth to then be able to spend money?
Yes. Now, I don't have a problem with the idea of taxing wealth.
To clarify my question, she specifically set up the plan. The way she explained the plan was, this tax raises this amount of money, which would pay for this because this is how much this costs.
Right. Okay, so what that implies is that in all cases we should have some kind of pay-go, because that's why she's doing it, where that you need to get the money to be able to spend. So it shows that an ignorance of how the monetary system works. So even if it somehow worked politically and did things, it's still, intellectually dishonest, or it's just a sign of ignorance. I'm not sure which one. Now, I've offered to give her a briefing on many occasions over the last 20 years. She's never accepted. And she continues to have the sequence backwards, and the progressive agenda continues not to happen. And it's the same thing with Senator Sanders, okay? The progressive, he's got it backwards, and I think both of those two individuals are part of the problem in that because they've got the sequence backwards, they don't win the arguments because they have to argue on their terms, and so we lose. And so we don't have the benefits that they're trying to provide by doing this wealth tax thing. Let me give you an example of another example. You've heard people talk about negative interest rates. Okay, so a negative interest rate means, let's say it's a negative 1% rate. So if you have $100 in the bank at the end of the year, you only have 99. And that's supposed to be good for the economy. You lower interest rates, the economy gets better, supposedly. You get to zero, what do? Well, you go negative. Now now you're really stimulating the economy. Now let's look at Elizabeth Warren's wealth tax. Let's say it was 1% tax on bank deposits. You start the year with $100, a year later you have 99. What's the difference? Okay, well, one's a wealth tax. It's a tax taking away money. It's going to slow the economy. The other's a negative interest. Well, functionally, they're both the same thing. You start off with $100, you wind up with 99. You really don't care what they call it. You're going to be worse off. They're both a tax, and negative rates being proposed to help the economy is just a big tax on the economy that makes it worse. Now, Elizabeth Warren's tax on wealth, there's nothing particularly wrong with it. But what happens is you have to think about what the purpose of the tax is from the beginning. The purpose of the tax is to create sellers of things that the government wants to buy. So first, Elizabeth Warren needs to look at what the government wants to buy, what she's trying to spend on in her proposal, and what were her expenses on that? Maybe public education, or were there other things that she had specifically proposed for the spending?
I think universal child care, preschool.
Universal child care. Okay, so the government can look at it right now and say, look, are the resources for universal child care available? Are there the caregivers? Is there the place for it? Are there the people the government could hire to organize it? And if you look at 15 million unemployed people, I'd say, yeah, we have more than enough there. They're all looking for work. They'd all accept well-paid government jobs to do it. So the people are there. They will go to work if the government pays them. Okay, so the tax that we already have in place, the tax liabilities, are already creating enough things for sale to buy what the government wants to buy, childcare. Okay, so you don't need the wealth tax to pay for that. Now, the next thing you look at, you say, okay, if we do the wealth tax, is that going to create even more things for sale? And the short answer is probably not, because that particular tax tends to take the money away from people who already have a lot of money. And they're not going to spend less, leaving more things for sale for the government to buy. That's called creating fiscal space. Having things available for the government to buy. What's available for the government to buy is called fiscal space by economists. So taxing somebody who already has a lot of money, now they have less money, they're not going to eat fewer meals, so there's more food available for the government to buy. They're not going to travel less on their private jets, so there's more of those resources for the government to buy. Okay, it's not going to happen. And so it doesn't free up any fiscal space. What does it do? Well, it's a move towards social equity. Having that massive disparity of wealth creates, social issues. And I have a lot of proposals designed to alleviate some of those stresses, but that's not one of them, because it doesn't work for that either. It's not enough to make a whole lot of difference. All it does is get them mad, to hire more lobbyists to do other things, and to just try and protect what they have. And they're pretty good at that. Okay, so so I'm against her proposal on several grounds, but I'm entirely in favor of the universal child care. And there's just ways to do that where it could actually happen, as opposed to this way where you could say maybe it'll happen, but it's been a long time and it hasn't happened. So, and I've been saying for a long time that the odds of this working are slim and none. It's just going to backfire, and it continues to backfire. And the opposition knows that. So those are the plans they put on television, put up there, because they know they're going to lose.
Right. So just to be super clear then, the policy idea of universal childcare, this very nice progressive policy, anyone who has a progressive bone in their body would not oppose it. What you're saying is that the argument to propose it can't rest on the idea that we have to tax wealth in order to get it.
That's right. So if you look at Senator Sanders' proposal for Medicare for All in 2016, he had a $2 trillion tax with that. And Hillary Clinton looks at it and says, see, we can't afford this. That's why we have to stay with Obamacare, which was Romney Care, which is Republican health care, which is horrible. Right? I'm sure there's something worse we can do, but it's pretty bad. So where Medicare for all is not. Now, I was actually in Senator Sanders' office back then, talking to his aides. One of them was Matt Stoller. I don't know if you know him. And
Yeah.
good
Well,
solid.
and your friend Professor Kelton was one of his senior economic advisors.
Okay, good. Yeah. So we pointed out, look, the reason we don't have Medicare for all is your tax proposal, not because of anything with Medicare for all. We can have free Medicare for all. It does, and the proposals now, people are paying for it and whatever, and they're showing it's less anyway. Because Medicare for all is a highly deflationary event. It creates fiscal space. It doesn't use it up. Number one, it saves at least $500 billion a year in real resources for the country. All those people tied up doing advertising and promotions and accounting and private health companies that don't need to be there. It's like they're digging holes and filling it in. It's just a waste of human endeavor. They are freed up to do other things. They could be out curing cancer or whatever, and holding hands in the nursing home. Anything other than what they're doing would be a constructive thing. And I'm not demonizing them. They're people who are victims, of the tax liabilities like we are. Maybe victims not the right word, but they're
Constituents.
Yeah, they're constituents. Okay, they're taxpayers like us, and they need everything they buy comes from taxpayers, and so they need the money to work. And so they're very forthright people going to work every day, working hard, very smart. But let's put them doing something that serves public purpose rather than have the incentives in place where they can do something that serves public purpose rather than an incentive that works against public purpose. So
Right.
If we had Medicare for all, we'd have a deflationary event. 5 million new people would be looking for work. When there's 5 million new people looking for work, you don't raise taxes. If anything, you lower taxes. Now, maybe 5 years down the road, everybody will have a job and the economy will be too strong and there'll be excess demand, which, by the way, I've never seen in my lifetime. I'm 72 this year. And so we would need to raise taxes then to cool things down, not to get money to spend, but just to slow things down. If the economy was too good, which is a good thing, right? So if things are too good and we want to slow it down a little bit, we can do it. But you don't do that now. It's like if you're driving your car down the road and you need to turn left in 5 miles. You don't turn left now. You're going to crash on the side of the road. You wait till you get to your exit. Right. So that's how fiscal policy works. You don't lead the target like that. That's absurdity. Right. And so it's the headline left, like Senator Sanders and like Elizabeth Warren. Not that their primary proposals aren't, those are good. I like their proposals. But because they tie them to how they're going to pay for it, it kills the proposals. They're non-starters. And here we are sitting here 20 years later, and we still don't have the things we should have had 20 years ago. And I'm still saying the same thing I've been saying for 20 years. I'm glad you're listening.
So I think Alex Hack, who's also a candidate for Coral Gables City Commission, I believe he has a question. Alex, you're muted. Okay, there you go. You're good.
Hi, Warren. Just a quick question in regards to what we were talking about in the wealth tax and whatnot, and sort of understanding all the jargon. How do we go about like taking that to the average voter? Because with like the Republicans and conservatives, they've been able to turn like wealth tax and the estate tax into the death tax, the great boogeyman. And so I was just wondering, is there a way that we can effectively brand wealth tax and any kind of real fiscal responsibility on working class families to get them to see our point of view?
Okay, well, I would not lead with the wealth tax at all. What I've proposed is cutting off the wealth at source rather than trying to take it away after the person's earned it. If nothing else, at a practical level, it's been shown for exercise and futility. So I'm not against it, but I recognize it as not the starting place to address this issue. Okay, so there are certain starting places. One of them is this zero interest rate. You need to make that permanent. Is what I call it is basic income for people who already have money. It's a major contributor to the disparity of incomes. If you look, that disparity of income has actually stopped getting worse the last few years now that we've had zero interest rate policy. And so we want to keep that in place to keep, we've got that leg up now on that problem. It's been one step. There are a lot of steps necessary. It's a one, substantial step that has to stay there. The governments probably would be paying $500 billion more in interest to the economy if rates were higher. And that would all go to higher income people because it only goes to people who already have money. It doesn't go anywhere for all practical purposes. So it's just basic income for people who already have money. Now, some people are in favor of basic income, but none of them, I don't think, are in favor of basic income only for people who already have money, right? So I don't think there's any constituency for that. And so it should be, that understanding should be fairly easy to promote. Now, what it's going to require is the leadership of the Democratic Party to recognize it as critical to be able to get your message across and sustain the party and sustain its position, the leadership position.
So Alex, do you have a follow-up to that, or did he answer your question?
Yeah.
You're muted.
Sorry, that's weird. No, Warren, you answered my question. If I have any other questions, I'll try to answer them if I can.
Oh, wait,
Yeah.
hold on. Hold on. I think we have some connectivity. Okay, yeah, Warren, you're back. All right. Okay.
So you can have the party leadership, right? You have to have Elizabeth Warren leading the promotion and not working against you.
Right. So the good news is that we do have some of the local party leadership on the call. So that's why I made sure that they came in to listen in. Now, Warren, so on that note, would you then suggest that, when it comes, at least, because we're talking really at the federal level, right? Because this is where that's the most relevant. How about at the county or statewide level? Like what makes the county or statewide level different from the federal level?
So let me give you an analogy. So let's say the government could create a drought, and then it can also make it rain. That would be the drought would be the taxes. It could also make it rain. That's the spending. Okay, and it's there's a drought, and so there's a water shortage on Earth because the government thinks it's got to balance its budget, or it's afraid to make it rain because it's afraid of creating inflation or something, and it's not doing it. So what can the farmer do if the government's not allowing it to rain properly? Not a whole lot. We're a federation, we're a union, we're a republic, where we've given these responsibilities to a federal government. The states have given it to a federal government, and no longer has the control that it might have had if it was just the states. And so it's a good, there are benefits, and there are positives and negatives to doing that. The same things happen in the European Union, where they've all given the ability to deficit spend to the European Central Bank, basically through its channels. And it's not deficit spending enough to have European prosperity. And so they're kind of stuck with that. And over here, we're in the same position. Sometimes it happens where the federal government has a large enough deficit. And it's not just the federal government. Well, yeah, federal government has a large enough deficit for prosperity, and we're okay. And other times it doesn't, and we're just all stuck with it until it figures out what it has to do. And the interesting thing is that the total deficit spending is a combination between public and private. They both count just as much. If you go out and borrow money to buy a house, that counts the same as if the federal government goes out and deficit spends more than its income. If you spend more than your income.
So sorry to interrupt you. Can you actually unpack, because so just to give everyone a bit of background, I mean, you worked as a banker for many years. So can you unpack the private sector's deficit, so to speak, a little bit more?
So here's the way capitalism, monetary capitalism works. If anybody spends less than his income, there's a problem. All right. So in the way, it's called the paradox of thrift. And the the easiest way to understand that is suppose nobody spent anything, what would happen? Well, and everybody just wanted to save all their money. Nobody would spend anything. Well, then there'd be no sales, then there'd be no income because that's where income comes from, sales. And the economy would go to zero. There'd be nothing would be happening. Everything would collapse. Okay, so that's on the total level if nobody spent anything. Well, if anybody doesn't spend some of their income, there's not enough spending for the rest of the people to sell their products. Okay, and that's just what they call an accounting identity. If the GDP was $25 trillion last year, it means 25 trillion was spent and 25 trillion was earned. For every dollar you spend, somebody else is earning a dollar, it's getting a dollar. And so if those people didn't spend their 25 trillion of earnings, you wouldn't have the 25 trillion to spend on their products. And if anybody doesn't spend a penny, then there's a penny short, unless somebody spends a penny more than their income. And so the way to say it, to sum it up, is for everybody who spends less than their income, somebody else has to spend more than their income, but the output would not have been sold last year. And it always applies to last year. Looking back, you can say for everybody who spent less than their income, someone else spent more than their income. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had 25 trillion of total spending. And so who is spending less than their income? Well, every time you save money, put a dollar in your pocket, put money in your IRA, have payroll deductions for anything, you're spending less than your income. And who spends more than their income? Well, anybody who borrows to buy a house or borrows to buy a car, they're spending more than their income, making up for all those people who spent less than their income. And the federal government spends more than its income. It spends more than it taxes. Okay, spending is a higher number than taxes. It changes numbers up more than it changes numbers down. That's called spending more than your income, right? And so so the public sector spends more than its income, and many agents in the private sector, businesses spend more than their income when they invest in new plant and equipment, when they borrow money to buy things. So so we have both sectors spending more than their income. And that's called deficit spending. Anytime you spend more than your income, it's called deficit spending. What happens in the slowdown is the private sector stops deficit spending because it doesn't qualify. You lose your job, you can't buy a house, you can't buy a car, the banks won't lend to you, nor should they. So that means in a slowdown, the government has to step it up with its deficit spending. It has to tax less or spend more to offset people's desire to save, because the private sector is not doing the deficit spending. And the buzzword for that is pro-cyclical. Private sector, when things slow down, it slows down. When things speed up, it speeds up. It's always, accelerating the problem. The government can act counter-cyclical. It can do more deficit spending when the private sector is doing less, and it can do less deficit spending when the private sector is doing more to keep the economy in balance. Does that answer your question?
So I want to make sure that everyone understands, exactly what's being said here. Is that the right way to look at the economy is that it is a series of accounts, and they all have to balance out, right? There is, even if you take into consideration trade, which is its own animal, but even if you take into consideration trade, there's imports, right? There's exports, and then there's capital inflows and capital outflows, which cover those things, right? So when we're talking about the public sector doing a deficit, right? We're talking about the federal government spending, whatever it was, $2-3 trillion more than it's collected in taxes. That $2-3 trillion isn't just going into a black hole, right? That's going to the private sector, correct?
Yes. Private sector benefits.
Right.
Now and when I say the private sector, that would include residents and non-residents. That goes to people who live here and people who live overseas. Somebody in China might be selling us something, earning dollars and not spending them. That's unspent income. That means we could have lower taxes or more public services. The government can spend more than its income to make up for it. So the trade deficit's a good thing. It allows us to have fiscal space, much higher public services, because it means all those people in the world are selling things and not spending their income. So that's a benefit for us, which is another thing the Democrats and the Republicans both have wrong. This whole policy against imports is taking away our fiscal space It's using up things, the proposals are, it's giving us things for sale. The trade deficit means that we have all these called foreigners, I say non-residents, people who don't live here, selling things and not spending their income. And so now all those things are for sale. And they can be bought by entities who are going to spend more than their income. And that can be the federal government. And they're giving us the fiscal space we need for the Green New Deal. If we get rid of that trade deficit of 500, 600, 700 billion a year, we have that much less room for government spending on public services to meet our needs. And
Right.
we have to get that room through higher taxes. So the short answer is, if we eliminate the trade deficit of 600, 700 billion, we'd have to raise taxes by 700 billion. And the whole argument was out there when unemployment was 3%. We were very close to full employment by, some measures. It's not that there aren't still a lot of people available who could have worked, but we were reasonably close, a lot closer than we've been in years. And both parties have it wrong, and they doubled down on it. And that has to go. That's working against the progressive agenda, big time.
So
I call it the innocent fraud of the trade deficit.
that's right. So we have Robert Dempster, who's the outreach chair for the Miami-Dade Democratic Party, and also the chair of the Progressive Caucus. Robert, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. Hang on a second. Hi, nice to meet you, Warren. Thank you so much for for taking the time to speak with everyone here today. I find, what you're talking about very, fascinating. I actually went to school and got an economics degree, so I'm really into what you're talking about. Specifically with regards to what you just discussed with regards to spending, how do you see the extreme accumulation of wealth at the upper end of the private sector, affecting what you're discussing with regards to private sector spending?
So what that does is that's all unspent income. And it's better that they don't spend it, because then it allows for either lower taxes. We get rid of some regressive taxes. We've got some horribly regressive taxes, sales taxes, or we could increase public services. We have increased public services because of that. Okay, so that's actually, it's not good that they earn that much money necessarily, but it's good that they haven't spent it, right? Because think of the man in the moon. If he won the national lottery and won $20 trillion, and he just kept it all in the bank and never did anything, how would anybody even know? Okay, it would have no effect on the economy at all, no effect on anybody's life or income. Some accountant would say that public debt's gone up by 20 trillion, but apart from that, if he didn't happen to say that, nobody would ever know the difference. There'd be no effect on the real world. So that unspent income is actually a good thing. The bad part of it is that it buys influence, it buys power. And that power and influence, A, can be getting used in ways we don't want, and B, it's not democratic, right? It's not you suddenly don't have representative government based on one man, one vote. It becomes $1, one vote. Can I give you my campaign finance proposal?
Sure. Sure.
All right, because this is fundamental to all, because what you've touched on is this thing we've created, this universe of several thousand billionaires who can have a disproportionate amount of political power because of how do you address that? So I came up with this 60-40 proposal, and it doesn't have to be exactly 60-40. That's just to make the point, where anybody can donate as much as they want to any political candidate in the U.S. And you can be from anywhere, but out of every $100 you donate, $40 goes to the opposition. And I think that goes a long way in eliminating the influence of money in politics. Because the opposition is getting 40%, it's still a pretty good chunk of money. And they're not beholden to anybody. It came from the opposition's donation. The donation isn't worth as much as to the intended party as it is today by a long shot, because the other side's getting enough money to talk back. And I'm thinking 40% is probably enough to answer a 60% contribution.
So
And there's no government involved, there's no government money. Yeah, and it's easily enforced. And you're not taking away anybody's constitutional rights.
So I just wanted to touch a little bit on one thing you just said right now, because this is something that I feel like people fail to really articulate, which is that the problem with having extreme wealth at the top, right, where somebody who has 50 million, I'm closer to someone who has $50 million net worth than that person is to Jeff Bezos by a long shot, right, by an order of magnitude difference, right? The bad thing about having the Jeff Bezos and the Elon Musks who have, well over 180 billion, 170 billion, these astronomical numbers, is that is not so much of the economics, but more so the politics, right? Where you now have individuals who can basically exert astronomically more power over, your average citizen, and that makes it undemocratic. Am I getting that correctly?
Yes, and also they control investment to a disproportionate degree. They can decide we're going to invest in, lung cancer research rather than COVID research, for example. It's not democratically decided. They can decide they're going to build a new library, whether anybody else wants one or not, as long as the zoning laws permit it. And so you get an enormous amount of resources directed by these types of people, donating new football stadiums or whatever they're doing, that don't necessarily serve public purpose, would not have been the first choice of a democratic body.
That's right. Now, I did also want
Like the great pyramids. You think those people wanted to do that?
Right, exactly. And I think it's a point that often gets missed by people who, I consider myself to be on the left. And I think that articulation makes a lot of sense where, when you hear Miami, for example, right, we have a lot of multi-billion-dollar developing companies. Miami has a very strong construction real estate economy. And, you basically have a situation where these multi-billion-dollar developers can basically buy off the city commission or, whatever municipality they want to invest in, and, purchase and construct luxury condos when, young people like myself would much rather have affordable housing, right? Warren, you still there?
Right. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, there we go. You're back. Yeah.
I heard you.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I heard everything. Or more medical research and cure cancer rather than build more condos. It's the trade-offs are to have public transportation. Rather than.
Yeah. Have you been
to the extent there's a trade.
Have you been to Miami? Are you familiar with our public transport system?
Yeah, I lived in West Palm, for 20 years. Yeah. Tri-rail and all that. Yeah.
Yeah. The public transportation system is very sad here.
So I had a proposal to drive transportation that is so distasteful to so many people, but it does work. And just to make the point, and that is if you set the speed limit for private transportation at 30 miles an hour, you will have public transportation in very short order, because in the sense that time is money for the wealthier people, the time that they spend at 30 miles an hour is worth a lot more to them than our time, right? And they'll make sure that public transportation goes so they can go 70 or 80 so they can get where they want to be on time, right? They're not going to sit at 30 miles an hour going cross country. And the only other way to do that is going to be through public transportation, one form or another. And so to me, the way to drive it is to recognize the value of time of people who have money and to put a price on it for them. And that does it. Well, what do I hear? Oh, no, you can't take away my right to drive 60 miles an hour. What if I wanted to, so it's kind of a fallacy of composition thing.
That's right. That's right.
It doesn't get anywhere. But to me, that's how you drive public transportation. Take away the speed of private transportation. That's the real valuable commodity to the high-end people.
Now, one dilemma that, because again, we're the Young Democrats of Miami-Dade. We have representatives from the Miami-Dade County Party. You know, we have our people, some of our people got elected to county commission. In fact, you know, the current mayor, Miami-Dade County, the Democratic Party strongly supported her, you know, gave her resources. She ended up winning, even though it was a nonpartisan race. However, the reality of, especially in terms of local politics, is that there is a limitation in our ability to mobilize resources. Now, I kind of wanted to pick your brain a little bit on this regard because, you know, I do know that there can be a way for municipals to issue municipal bonds to then be able to do public investments. Now, they don't want to do that because they don't want to take responsibility if things don't match out. But I wanted to get your perspective. Would it be worth doing a little bit of deficit spending at the county level to do things like public transportation and so and so? What do you think about that?
You know, they can do it, and I have ways to do it at very low interest rates, but it's going to limit them to probably 10% of the current tax base. So if their tax base is 100 million, they could get an extra 10 million, 5 to 10 million a year, which is something, but it's not. You know, it is limited. Okay, and they can issue tax credits, and they can issue longer term tax credits. They can issue interest bearing tax credits to get people to buy those things so that they can get funding by doing that. But you can, you know, you can turn yourself into Puerto Rico pretty easily, if you know, if you're not careful, because you are playing with fire to some degree. But in difficult times, it can be done, and it can get you through.
Right. And actually, now you touched on Puerto Rico, I do want to emphasize this part because we kind of glossed over it. There is this significant difference between something like Greece and Puerto Rico versus, let's say, you know, Japan and, you know, the United States federal government.
Right.
Can you expand a little bit on this idea of monetary sovereignty?
Yeah, you know, I don't use that word, and the others picked it up, and I've stayed away from it because it changes the definition of the word sovereignty the way it's normally used, and so I feel it just adds to the confusion. So if I can, I can give you the answer without using that word.
No problem.
Okay, so it comes back to sequence. The federal government spends first to provide the dollars that can be used to pay taxes. The local government has to get the dollars first before it can spend. So it's an entirely different thing. Greece, when it had drachma, had to spend drachma first before drachma taxes could be paid. When they switched to the euro, Greece became like Florida or California or Puerto Rico, where Greece has to get the euro first before it can spend. So think about what your sequence is, what you have to do first. So the local governments have to get dollars before they can spend. It's not the same for the federal government. The federal government's the opposite. And so, yeah, I mean, that's the fundamental difference. Now, what some people have done is used a word, made up a word for that they call monetary sovereignty, which they apply to those who spend first without actually saying that. And then they give you a conditions of what you have to be, and those don't always apply either. They're not consistent. So I think it's, for me personally, where I've kind of on record for everything I've said for the last 35 years, I don't use that word because it just doesn't fit.
Sure.
In terms of narrative. It's not part
No
of
problem. Now, the other issue that oftentimes gets into people's heads, besides the how do you pay for it, which I think we thoroughly showed that it doesn't apply, is the question of inflation, right? Now, I am a student of history. I know for a fact the United States has never experienced any significant inflation other than the 70s, and the 70s even then was pretty mild by historical standards, right? 10%. Now, you not only know about this from an economics point of view, you lived through all that. So if you can actually explain, you know, why is the fear of inflation in the United States totally overblown, and why comparisons to Venezuela are totally nonsensical?
Well, generally, people prefer unemployment to inflation. I've just noticed that. And so if there's 10% unemployment, 90% of the people have jobs. And 10% unemployment is very high. So now they can, hire a plumber and electrician pretty cheap because all those people are out of work. And they kind of like that. So unemployment is, until it hits close to home and gets large enough, it gets widespread enough that people kind of like it. They don't like the idea that, gee, I got to pay $70 an hour for a plumber. But if they're, when they look at their own salary, they're earning $100 an hour or whatever, $200,000 a year working for the city. That's okay. But they don't think I should have to pay that for somebody else who's doing some work that takes a lot more knowledge that I don't want to do. And when you don't have, high unemployment, then you got to pay more to get people to come and do things. You don't have desperate people out there willing to work for you. How many people say, "Oh, I visited this country, Panama or something. What a great place! I could get dinner for $4." It's like, okay, but that's human nature. All right, yeah, you go to a place that's desperate enough, you're going to get things for very little money, and therefore you like that place. It's okay. So, but that tells you a lot about people. So people prefer high unemployment, low inflation. They think inflation is the government robbing them of their savings, which is in dollars, and that it's a form of theft. And so they don't like it, and they're against it. So you get people, spooked very easily by talk about possible inflation, overheating economy, and those kinds of things. And so I think, so I'm answering that part of your question. Now, the next thing is, like, what is it, right? The interesting thing is, everybody says modern monetary theory. Well, the one thing they don't understand is inflation. It's the one thing that no one else understands except modern monetary theory. We understand the source of the price level, why prices are where they are. If you ask any mainstream economist, why are prices where they are, they don't know. They have to say, well, how did they get to where they are? How did this computer, why is it $1,000, not $100,000, not $1? Why is the price level where it is today? And they can say, oh, it's because it's 3% higher than it was a year ago. All right, well, why was it there a year ago? Oh, it's because it was 2% higher than the year before. They can give you an infinite regression, but they can't tell you where it came from, where it started from. And their model don't. So if this thing's worth 3 times, you want to price it in yen, this is 100 yen, this is 300. You want to price it in, euro, they'll tell you, but they can't say where it came from. So the government has the dollars that we need. It's a simple monopoly. It's got all this, it's got the supply. It tells us what the price is. There's no other way for it to work. What's the price of a ticket to the Orange Bowl? It's whatever the operator charges. If he charges too much, he might not get anybody. That's still the price. If he doesn't charge enough, they'll be able to line at the door, but that's still the price. The price of his tickets doesn't change until he tells his ticket clerk, look, change the price. Okay, he tells you what you have to do to get his ticket, what you have to do in exchange. So when the government tells us you have to serve a year in the military to earn 50,000 of these dollars, they're telling us what we have to do to get its dollars that don't come from anywhere else. When it buys anything, it's making a statement as to what has to be done to get its money. And it does this every single time it spends. We have no choice. They're pitching and we're catching. It's their dollars. If they say, look, we're not going to pay a penny more this year than we paid last year, period. And suddenly prices go up and everybody raises their prices by what's the penny. Well, government spending would go to zero. Now there's 4 trillion in taxes that have to be paid and no government spending. Where's that coming from? It isn't. Okay, the economy will be forced through people selling, going out of business to lower their prices, and it won't stop until they sell to the government to get their trillions of dollars they need to pay taxes. And if the government says this is what I'm going to pay, we're stuck. Now, I'm not saying it's good politics or good policy to do that, I mean, it's not worth throwing an economy into reverse just to keep prices from going up. It's not a good political choice, but that is how it works. And that is the first thing you learn in economics 101, microeconomics, is monopoly. Somebody has, all the water and you're dying of thirst, they tell you the price. There's no market. Market requires many sellers and many buyers, commonplace and information, not some guy who has it all and everybody else needs it, or else you're dead, right? The government is coercive. The tax liabilities are coercive. You're gonna lose your house and your car. You need our money. Here's what you got to do to get it, take it or leave it. That's
Now,
what they're saying when they spend. But they don't know that.
right. Now, I
Yeah.
think that point
So if they
is,
keep paying more and more every year,
oh, sorry, go ahead, finish.
Yeah.
There's a little bit
yeah,
of a
so
lag.
they don't know that. Okay, the government doesn't know it has that influence or authority. It thinks it has to pay the prices people are asking.
Right.
So it sees people asking a little more money and it pays it. They don't realize they've just changed the value of their money. And if they do that every year, that's called inflation. So it's the government changing the value of its money, redefining it lower by paying more and more for the same old thing. We're paying $20 an hour this year. Next year we'll pay 25. The next year we'll pay 30. More and more dollars buys the same amount of time. The value of the money is going down. They are the ones decreasing the value of their own money by doing that. They don't even know it.
And I think
Okay, so they say, "Oh, wait a minute." Yeah.
just interrupt you.
Go
I
ahead.
think that actually goes into one of the reasons why Medicare for all works, right? So one of the reasons why single payer systems work as a really good
Yeah.
cost cutting system in healthcare is that the government has monopsony power, where they are the only buyers, and they can then negotiate prices down. Where, in the case of the United States, where drug prices are out of control. I mean, I know, Warren, you've been pretty much all over the world, and I know you've traveled to Italy. My grandmother's from Italy. I've traveled to Italy a couple of times. The prices that I tell some of my Italian relatives over there for like American prescription, they think it's out. It's something that they can't even understand, right? And that comes from the fact that Italy has that single payer system. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, I don't know all those details. I know you're generally correct, so I couldn't argue it in a debate right now because I don't have the specific information. But we've got a policy where we can't, because it's going to undermine the drug companies. We should be able to shop at lowest prices. And if there's a problem with drug companies, you solve it some other way, other than making Americans pay 100 times more for the drug. There's other ways. If that does create a problem, much better ways, much more democratic ways to solve those problems than that. That's not the. If we were buying all over the world, like other people can, and our drug companies had a problem, somebody would say, "Oh, I have the answer. Let's have Americans pay 100 times more, for all their drugs." I mean, it just wouldn't work. It's just not a solution. So, but we're there. And so we're stuck with it right now. And so clean sheet of paper, this would never happen. And it's not being looked at that way. So again, that's the problem of money in politics. And that's the problem that has to start with my 60-40 solution or something similar to get that money and influence out of Congress. How are these people in Congress supporting this stuff?
Right.
How do they get the votes to keep that there? Something's, well, we know, my answer to that question is like, what are you, you must be new here, right? We all know what's going on.
I guarantee you, no one in Congress, a lot of people in Congress, I think, are even part of the silent generation at this point.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
Right.
But Warren, so I want to ask you a couple more questions. Then I'll open it up to everyone else to ask anything they like. Warren is being very generous. He has no hard exit, but I don't want it to go too much past 2:30 p.m. EST. So I have a question from William Byatt, who's the Democratic State Committee man. His question is a little wonky. So I apologize for those in the audience who might not have some context. But what is the relationship between United States having reserve currency status, meaning the US dollar is the one that most central banks in the world have the most of in their foreign exchange reserves? And does that play any role in our ability to be fiscally flexible?
So the short answer is yes. That is what I was talking about before. That's the unspent income, right? Where their countries have earned US dollars, in this case by selling yen or by selling yuan or some other currency. They've earned US dollars and they haven't spent them. And so that gives us fiscal space, that gives us room to have more public services and to, or have lower taxes. It's a political choice. So we should thank them for doing that and not criticize them for manipulating their currencies and trying to get them to stop doing it so we can have more jobs. Okay, jobs are a real cost, not a benefit. They've got that whole thing backwards. There's always more work to be done than there is people to do it. It's just a question of how we're employing our population. And if somebody else is willing to build things for us so we don't have to employ our population doing that, we can have more healthcare workers, more workers in public education, more medical research, more high-tech workers, and fewer whatever they're doing for us. So, it's like we're trying to kill this goose that's laying a golden egg.
Right. I want to remind everyone that it's a good
So
thing.
the short answer is yes. It's very helpful. It gives us more fiscal space. It allows us to have higher deficit.
Okay, can you hear Warren? Are you there?
I'm back here.
Okay, yeah. So there was some connectivity lag. Yeah, I just want to remind everyone that it's a good thing that most of us are not toiling in farming anymore. Right. It's a good thing that most of us don't have to work in a factory anymore. Right. The transition away from that hard manual labor, it has been a good thing for humanity. Right. So the last little point I wanted to kind of circle back on was talking about inflation. Right now we have the $1.9 trillion Biden bill. Yeah. Which will include $1,400 checks for, I think now they moved it up to people making up to $100,000 a year. Now, Larry Summers, a very good friend of yours, I believe, has stated that he thinks that this will cause unimaginable inflation. What do you think about that?
I don't think so. Number one, it's mostly things like unemployment compensation and one-time checks. So it's not recurring. So whatever it's adding to the public spending this year the one-times will not be adding next year. Okay, and so if it changes, if there becomes too much demand that causes prices to go up, which I don't see happening either, without the inflation, but if it did, it would be a one-time increase in prices of 1 or 2 or 3%. Then it wouldn't happen after that. You just don't have to give the checks out next year. So if prices go up too much this year, don't give them out next year. The other thing is the rest of it is going for unemployment compensation. And not nobody, but in the general case is that no one's income is higher than it was when they were working. Okay, some is a little higher, some's a little lower, but on average, let's just say, for purposes of this discussion, nobody's income is higher than it was when they were working. So you're not going to get more spending than we had before. And the other thing is that you're going to get less spending because even though you collect unemployment, you don't qualify for loans. And so a lot of consumer spending came from buying cars or buying electronics on payments, on time payments. And when you're unemployed, you don't qualify. So we've lost the private sector's deficit spending is way down. So some of the excess income makes up for the lack of deficit spending. And if you look at personal consumption expenditures, they're down, they're not up. Okay, and so even with the extra income, expenditures are down because of the inability to buy through credit. Credit's way down. And the last part is that if it does cause the economy to do better, or if the economy does better for any reason, and employment goes back up, 10 million people get their jobs back. Well, that's 10 million people who now will not be collecting unemployment. And so that will automatically cut government spending. we'll be right back where we were before COVID, which was a relatively weak economy that had already been drifting down because of the tariffs, and it had been drifting down dramatically.
So you mean to tell me that Trump did not have the greatest economy in human history?
You know, I don't want to speak out against the president. Is this up? But you know, he did not, of course. And it was doing okay. The tax cuts certainly didn't hurt, but then when he put the tariffs on, it just pulled the rug out of everything. And unfortunately, the Democrats supported the tariffs. There was 90% approval across the board for the tariffs. And the political leadership supported tariffs and supported all kinds of Buy America. And President Biden's just put in some new Buy America things. And this is all taking away our precious fiscal space that we're going to need for the Green New Deal. I'm not going to get into specifics now. We're going to need trillions for that. And we can't afford to, you know, to just give away concede this fiscal space like that in such a, you know, when we don't have to. We're killing the goose that's laying the golden eggs, giving us the fiscal room to do what desperately needs to be done. And now we're promoting programs that take it away for nothing. It's like a new program to outlaw lawnmowers. We all have to cut the grass with scissors so we'll have more jobs. It's like this is just madness. So you know, what I say it's confusing a productivity story with an unemployment story. That's exactly what it's doing. And both parties have done that. And the first party that gets these things right has got the high ground on everything. And I've always been rooting for the Democrats to do this, but you know, I've been disappointed. This is the first gathering of Democrats that's had me speak in front of it in 30 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And my family were Democrats, and you know, I don't belong to either party, but I certainly was hoping that they would grasp this. In 2010, I became a Democrat temporarily when I ran for Senate in Connecticut, but after going to a couple of meetings, I just dropped out and ran as an independent. Just because I couldn't support any, you know.
Don't worry, you're in good company though. Don't worry.
Okay. And, you know, hopefully things have changed, and this is the right branch. If there was a good branch to the party I could have associated with, I would have done it. But back then there wasn't.
Absolutely, totally understood. Well, you know, I could keep asking a million questions, but I do have an audience here that I want to open it up. Does anyone have any questions for Warren? Robert, go ahead. I saw your first.
I posted one in the chat. Adrian, I'm just going to go back to that one, if I can find it. Well, let me just do it from memory here. So it seems like economically, we could produce a progressive agenda. Is that correct?
Yes. In fact, it relieves economic stress to take on a progressive agenda. It doesn't stress anything. It's the opposite.
And such an agenda would generate much income as well in terms of taxation, even though taxation is not needed to fund all this, correct?
Right. So it would return, the government spends dollars, and then taxation returns those dollars to the government. So whether more or fewer of those dollars get returned to the government, it isn't particularly consequential, except, I don't know.
So what really, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Unless you have a bet on it or something.
What really stops this, Warren, is politics, yes?
Entirely.
Thank you.
I call it the space between our ears.
All right. So by the way, transparent facilitation here, you have an invite to come speak to the New York Progressive Action Network. I'm on their board of directors. We're a very progressive organization. We're also Democratic mostly, but we're frustrated with the Democratic Party as well. And we meet regularly, and I'm one of the chapter heads of Long Island Activists as well. So you got an open invite to come talk to us whenever. We'll work around your schedule.
You know, anytime. I'll drop everything to do it. Just let me know.
I'm very excited. I'll even stop my further questions right now because I'm that excited. Thanks, Adrian.
No, thank you, Robert. Appreciate it. So does anyone else have any questions?
Hi, yes, I have a question.
Yes, Susan, go ahead.
Yes, so thank you, Warren. I always enjoy listening to you. I'm learning a lot still. And so my question is, what I'm interested in is, so as I understand it, selling the treasury bonds is a policy choice, and it's done to this is the short layperson's version, but it's done to control overnight interest rates. And then also because people like them, because it's a guaranteed risk-free form of investment. So, but the problem with that is that everybody is obsessed about now the national debt. So I've heard one way to get rid of that is just to stop selling treasury bonds, and then we'll do away with having like this national debt quote unquote problem. So, and I know you've also mentioned ZIRP. So I guess if we stop doing that, then it would drop automatically. The interest rate would drop to zero. I'm not sure. I just wanted to know what you think about that. And if we did stop selling bonds, is that something that you think is a good idea? And would you, like, what would that look like? How would it change what we're currently doing now? How we do it now, I guess.
Yeah. Right. So, functionally now, if we kept interest rates at zero permanently, just had Congress tell the Fed, leave them at zero, and told the Treasury, don't sell anything longer than a 3-month Treasury bill, then interest rates would stay at zero. The public debt would go up. There'd be no interest and no payments due ever. It would not be a budget item. And so for all practical purposes, that would accomplish the same thing. And it would still be the public debt for accounting purposes, because it's a liability, because these dollars are tax credits that the government has awarded or spent. And so they consider those, for accounting purposes, those are liabilities or debt. So we can let them have their little dialogue. It doesn't really matter, their narrative. But functionally, we'd be operating as if there was no public debt, according to the people who want to abolish the debt. We'd be in the same place. And so it can be done very easily under current institutional structure by going to a permanent 0% rate and telling the Treasury not to sell anything longer than a 3-month Treasury bill. And then that accomplishes everything that no debt people would ever have dreamed of.
Perfect. Susan, do you have a follow-up, or is that okay?
No, that's great. Thank you.
Let me add one important thing here. Look, the central banks around the world, and a central banker, Richard Warner, just did a paper on this. They've got the interest rate thing backwards. They all think raising rates fights inflation. They say, well, what if you create inflation? We have to raise rates, public debt system, you got to pay all that interest. Raising rates does not fight inflation. Raising rates makes inflation worse. And he collected all the data to show it. I wrote my paper on it in 1996. Okay? And it's not, so for me, it isn't anything new. It's something I've tried to explain for a long time. I've got published journal papers on this, how it makes it worse, but I don't have the credibility of Larry Summers. But if you look at the new Keynesian economics, which is Larry Summers and Paul Krugman, it's very interesting, because Paul Krugman got in a debate with Stephanie Kelton on Bloomberg, and she came to me towards the end to his last response, and Stephanie had done a paper for me years ago showing that higher rates makes inflation worse. I said, look, in their new Keynesian economics, what they say is you can't support all these progressive programs. You can't have a job guarantee and Medicare for all, because if you let the public debt get too high, then if you raise rates to fight inflation, it makes it worse, because all that interest causes more inflation. And I said, Stephanie, you have to say, look, you're absolutely correct, except we're already there. Long ago, the public debt was high enough where raising rates caused more inflation. So we're already at that point. So we don't have to worry about making the public debt larger, because we won't be able to raise rates to fight inflation. We already can't raise rates to fight inflation. Raising rates already makes inflation worse, and it has for the last 50 years. And all the data shows it, as a foreign central banker, Richard Warner, documented, I don't know, I think a year or so ago in one of his journal papers. So again, it's sort of like sequence. Things are backwards. So we've got it backwards that the government has to get money to spend. Instead, we have to get their money to pay taxes. We know that's backwards. The other thing that's backwards is interest rates. Raising rates causes the economy to get better, causes inflation to go up, because the government's paying out all this interest income. It's basic income. It's paying it to people who already have money, which, yes, it helps the economy. But who wants to do that? And who wants to create inflation? Like nobody. That's your last choice. You never want that. Lowering rates makes the economy worse. It slows it down. We've now got 30 years of data from Japan and 10 years from the US and Europe showing that the zero rates have slowed the economies down. Growth is all a lot less than it was rates was higher. And they're still fighting it. It's like a little kid, 30 years, they were asked about it. They said, well, we just need a little more time. 30 years of zero rate. It's going to work. We just need more time. Mario Draghi said the same thing when he was at the European Central Bank. We just need a little more time. And Janet Yellen said the same thing. We just need a little more time. They're wrong. They've got it backwards. Okay, and I'll leave it at that.
Perfect. Robert, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I did. I hate to lose this opportunity because Warren, you're making my brain spin in a good way. In Japan has been deficit spending for what, 2 decades now? And they have a tremendous debt and they have inflation in check. So it looks like there's a lot of spending one can do before you get to a Weimar Republic. So I guess I want to know what's the difference between Japan and where they are right now and getting to the Weimar Republic in terms of spending and what happens.
So I just did a paper on the Weimar Republic with Phil Armstrong. It's pretty interesting. So what happened there was they were hit with war reparations. And they were forced to sell marks, to buy francs, to buy pounds, to buy gold. And there was what they called an agent general was set up to do this. The agent general had the authority to sell the German currency to buy this stuff. And it was equal to like 50% of GDP or more, like 5% a month that they were selling marks. And the market knew they had to do it. All the global markets knew it. And so the exchange rate just went down, down, down. And a lot of their things were imported, like food and things like that, because their economy had been devastated. And so the price of imports went up, which becomes, and the government paid the higher prices for those imports to redefine the value of the mark lower. So when it bought foreign exchange at higher prices, it paid more marks for the same number of pounds, francs, then it was inflating its currency, redefining it at a lower amount. And when it paid for food and other imports at higher prices, it was saying, okay, the mark's worth that much less. And it was doing it every month for increasing amounts. And it didn't stop until the Allies changed the war reparation formula, so they didn't have to do that anymore. And when it did stop, because a guy named Schatz was head of the central bank there, the inflation went to zero. As soon as the government was no longer forced to pay higher and higher prices for all these things, the inflation went to zero. So it's a one-time event, inflation. It's not something where if it starts to get out of control, it runs away. It's got to be nurtured by policy, forcing the government or the government voluntarily just paying more and more for the same things. Whenever it stops, the inflation stops.
Oh, Robert, you're muted.
Sorry. So the United States honestly could never get to a Weimar Republic, correct? Like when people throw that back at you and say, hey, we don't want to be like that. There were so many other things that happened to make that happen. How could we ever get that, our inflation out of control? I guess what I'm saying. Would you agree?
Yeah, we could see, I would say generally yes. And what happens is you look at Venezuela or places like that, and they lose control of the executive takes over the justice system. They lose control of the society in general. And they have an agenda to sell the currency for foreign exchange to, I'll just put it bluntly, to line their own pockets. What you have to do is Google corruption Venezuela. And you'll see these people in Miami were caught in dollars.
Oh yeah, that was
sold Bolivar to buy dollars and bought condos in Miami or something.
Yeah,
that's one guy, right?
The Venezuelan
Well,
term. The Venezuelan term for that is enchufado, which basically means the plugged-in ones. So.
Yeah, the insiders. So the insiders are getting phony loans on insider loans from banks without any pretense of paying back. They get foreign exchange, they sell it. I mean, they get Bolivar, they sell it, they take the foreign exchange investors, in the US or whatever. And when they sell their own currency to get the dollars, they borrow their own dollars from their local bank. They then their own currency, the Bolivars. They then sell those, which drives the foreign exchange rate down. Take the dollars and use them elsewhere. And so keep driving the foreign exchange rate down by those numbers, every day, and imported prices go up, and that's your inflation rate. And then the government pays those, pays its employees enough to pay those prices, and now the indexation of wages to imports just sustains the whole process, and it doesn't end until you do something about that. And it's very, very difficult to do anything about that form of corruption. It's nonviolent, and it's insidious, and it's pervasive.
So we actually have a candidate for U.S. Congress here, Ms. Christina Olivo. Would you like to make a statement before you go?
Hi, thank you so much. I'm actually at work, which is why I'm hiding. But I just wanted to say that I am so happy. I'm a progressive. I lean very far to the left. I push a lot of these policies of Medicare for all. I even push universal basic income. And a lot of people say, how are you going to get the money for it? Where's it going to come from? And my number one thing is, cutting the military spending and taxing big corporations. And so now I almost feel like I need to re-strategize after listening to this today, but I'm just so grateful that you took the time out. Thank you.
Well, thanks for being here. Please read my book. And I ran for Senate in 2010. I didn't get very many votes in Connecticut, but I did get to meet Dick Blumenthal and spend some time with him. And he eventually won. And he read the book, and we went through it, and he says, oh yeah, it's just like we learned in Harvard, when I went to school there. And he says, but I can't, is there anybody else in Congress who understands this? Because I can't just do this on my own. I said, I don't know. I'll let you know when there is. So
I agree. Like this whole time I'm thinking, how could I even relay this to anyone? I can't do this on my own. People will think that I'm just making this up.
The other guy who understands it implicitly is a guy named Hollins in Virginia, I think. Spent a lot of time with him, and same thing. He was very good. He's a very sharp guy. And he said, yeah, but I can't do this. And so he was just intellectually dishonest. Otherwise, he was going to lose his job. And so, but if you could, and Dick Gephardt, who's now gone, and then I was with Dashiell and those guys, he's gone too. If you can get any of these people together, maybe they get the courage to like explain how the monetary system works. I don't know.
Yeah, Warren, I mean, if you'd like to, post any kind of contact information on the chat, if you'd like to see.
Well, I'm on Facebook.
Okay.
And chat.
I will definitely reach out to you on Facebook, only because I'm a regular person running for Congress. It's not like I'm a politician. So sometimes I need to hear the information maybe once or twice before it actually, I can actually regurgitate it back,
Well, that's what the book, you like the book because it's short, number one, and it's non-technical, completely non-technical.
Thank you.
It's got good examples you can use to show people how it works. And also I'm warren.mosler@gmail.com. So
Thank you.
That's available. That's my email.
Perfect. All right. So we're just over 2:37. So I think that pretty much settles it unless there's any last question. Okay, I think we're good. So Warren, I wanted to thank you so much for being so generous with your time, not just today, but really the last, how long has it been now? 3 decades at least?
Yeah, since 1992, whatever that is.
Yeah, right. So before I was born, not to make you feel, but literally, but I am trying to get a lot more of my contemporaries up to date on this information. I know that Robert Dempster, who is with the Miami-Dade party, we could probably set something up with them as well, because I think that, having mainstream politicians understand this stuff, especially younger Democrats, is going to be one of the ways where, at least in the long run, we can win the argument. So we very much appreciate your time.
I saw another message there, but I've got Stephanie Kelton has something like over 100,000 followers on Twitter, and I got 18 or 19,000. So there's a presence there.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah, and we're also going to work on getting Professor Kelton on as well. So, so thank you everyone
Good.
for
yeah,
showing
yeah,
up.
Yeah, no, she's good. Thank you.
Thank you, Warren.
Thank you. Appreciate it.